The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fading flowers, but to Eleanor, it was the scent of time slipping away. Her trembling fingers clutched a photograph, its edges curled like the years she'd lived 87, each one etched into her weathered skin. She whispered a name, Tommy, her voice a fragile thread, as if speaking it too loudly might snap the last tether to her past. Eleanor's eyes, clouded with cataracts but sharp with memory, fixed on the young nurse adjusting her for. The nurse, Sarah, barely 25, moved with the efficiency of someone who hadn't yet learned to linger in moments of grief. Please, Eleanor rasped, her voice cutting through the sterile hum of machines. Find him. My Tommy. He's out there, I know it. Sarah paused, her hand hovering over the clipboard, caught off guard by the desperation in the old woman's gaze. The photo, creased and yellowed, showed a boy no older than 10, grinning under a summer sky, his arms slung around a younger Eleanor, her smile radiant with a love that time couldn't erase. Eleanor's story spilled out in fragments, like pages torn from a book no one had read in decades. Tommy wasn't her son, nor her grandson, but a neighbor's child she'd raised as her own after his parents died in a car crash in '68. She'd baked him cookies, bandaged his scraped knees, and taught him to whistle through blades of grass. But when he turned 18, Tommy vanished. No note, no goodbye, just an empty room and a hole in Eleanor's heart. For 50 years, she'd carried that photo, her only proof he'd existed, her only hope he'd return. Sarah, practical and overworked, wanted to dismiss it as the ramblings of a dying woman. But something in Eleanor's voice, the raw, aching need, stirred her. She took the photo, promising to try, though she had no idea where to start. The hospital was in a small town, Willow Creek, where secrets were as old as the oak trees lining Main Street. Sarah tucked the photo into her pocket, unaware it would lead her into a mystery that would unravel her own life. That night, Sarah sat in the break room, the photo on the table, its faded image haunting her. She posted a scan of it on a local history forum, a long shot, with a caption, looking for a man named Tommy, possibly in his 60s now, connected to Willow Creek. Last seen 1970s. Please help. By morning, her inbox was flooded, most messages useless, but one stood out. A user named Old Oak 67 wrote, "That boy looks like someone I knew. Meet me at the diner on Route 12. Noon." No name, no details, just an address. Sarah arrived at the diner, a relic of the 50s with peeling red booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. An old man sat in the corner, his face lined like a map of a hard life, his eyes sharp despite his age. He introduced himself as Carl, a retired mechanic who'd lived in Willow Creek his whole life. "That's Tommy Harper," he said, tapping the photo Sarah slid across the table. "Knew him when we were kids. Troubled boy after his folks died. Eleanor took him in, treated him like her own. But he ran off after some fight nobody knows what about." Carl leaned back, his voice dropping. "Heard he got mixed up with bad folks. Maybe drugs, maybe worse. Last I knew, he was in Chicago, about 30 years ago." Sarah's heart sank. Chicago was a world away, and 30 years was a lifetime. But Carl wasn't done. "There's a guy in town, runs the antique shop on Elm. Name's Daniel. He's got a story about Tommy, but he won't talk easy. Be careful, he's got a temper." Sarah thanked Carl and left, her mind racing. Daniel, the antique shop owner, was known in Willow Creek for his gruff demeanor and a shop stuffed with relics no one bought. She drove to Elm Street, the photo burning a hole in her pocket. The shop's bell jingled as she stepped inside, the air thick with dust and memory. Daniel, a wiry man in his 50s with a scar across his cheek, barely looked up from polishing a brass lamp. "What do you want?" he growled. "I'm looking for Tommy Harper," Sarah said, holding up the photo. Daniel froze, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, she thought he'd throw her out. Instead, he snatched the photo, his hands trembling. "Where'd you get this?" he demanded. Sarah explained Eleanor's plea, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Daniel's face softened, but only slightly. "Tommy was my brother," he said, the words heavy with pain. "Not by blood, but by choice. Eleanor raised us both after my folks left me on her doorstep. Tommy ran away, and I stayed. Never forgave him for leaving her." Sarah's breath caught. A brother? Eleanor hadn't mentioned anyone else. Daniel's story shifted the ground beneath her. He spoke of Tommy's guilt, how he'd blamed himself for his parents' death, how he'd spiraled into anger and shame. He loved Eleanor, Daniel said, but he couldn't face her after what he'd done. He stole money from her to run, thought he didn't deserve her kindness. Daniel handed the photo back, his voice bitter. If you find him, tell him he broke her heart. Sarah left the shop, her mind a storm of questions. Daniel's revelation was a twist she hadn't expected, a crack in the simple story of a lost boy. She drove back to the hospital, the photo heavier now, weighted with a brother's resentment and a grandmother's longing. Eleanor was asleep when Sarah arrived, her breathing shallow, the machines beeping softly. Sarah sat by her bed, wondering if Tommy was still out there, and if finding him would heal Eleanor or destroy her. Sarah spent the next morning chasing leads, her phone buzzing with responses from the forum. Most were dead ends, people claiming to know a Tommy, who turned out to be someone else. But one message, from a woman named Lila in Chicago, caught her eye. I think I knew a Tommy Harper. He worked at a shelter I volunteered at in the 90s. Quiet guy, kept to himself. Said he was from a small town, maybe yours. Lila included a phone number for the shelter, now a community center. Sarah called immediately, her heart pounding. The director, a gruff woman named Maria, confirmed that Thomas Harper had worked there years ago, fixing furniture, helping with odd jobs. He was good with his hands, Maria said, but haunted. Always talking about a woman who raised him, how he'd let her down. Maria had no current address, but mentioned Tommy had a friend, a former volunteer named Grace, who might know more. She gave Sarah Grace's contact info, warning her, Grace is a bit eccentric. Sarah tracked Grace to a small art studio in Chicago's West Side. The drive was 4 hours, and she used her day off, telling herself it was for Eleanor, though part of her was hooked on the mystery. Grace, a wiry woman in her 60s with paint-splattered overalls, welcomed Sarah into a cluttered studio filled with abstract sculptures. When Sarah showed her the photo, Grace's eyes lit up. Oh, Tommy, she said, her voice warm with memory. He was my friend. Helped me through a dark time. He never talked much about his past, but he mentioned a woman, Eleanor, I think, who was like his mother. Grace's story painted a different Tommy, not a runaway thief, but a man trying to atone. He'd worked at the shelter to help others, giving away most of his pay to homeless kids. He carried so much guilt, Grace said, like he didn't deserve happiness. She paused, then added, he left Chicago about 10 years ago. Said he was going to find his family, make things right. I got a postcard once, from a place called Redfield, about an hour from Willow Creek. That's all I know. Sarah's pulse quickened. Redfield was close to be a coincidence. She thanked Grace and drove back, her mind spinning. Was Tommy in Redfield, so near to Eleanor all this time? At the hospital, Eleanor was awake, her eyes brighter despite her weakening body. Sarah shared what she'd learned, leaving out Daniel's bitterness to spare her. Eleanor's face lit up at the mention of Redfield. He's close, she whispered, tears spilling. I knew he'd come back. Sarah drove to Redfield the next day, her stomach knotted with hope and fear. The town was smaller than Willow Creek, a cluster of farms and a main street with a single diner. She started there, showing the photo to the waitress, a middle-aged woman named Betty. Looks like Tom, Betty said, squinting. He's a handyman around here. Quiet, keeps to himself. Lives out by the old mill. Sarah's heart leapt. Could it be this easy? She found the mill, a crumbling structure by a dry riverbed, and a small cabin nearby. A man was outside, chopping wood, his back to her. He was in his 60s, lean but strong, his hair gray but still thick. Excuse me, Sarah called, holding up the photo. Are you Tommy Harper? The man froze, his axe mid-swing. He turned, and Sarah saw his eyes green, like the boy in the photo, but heavy with years of pain. I'm Tom, he said, his voice low. Who's asking? Sarah explained, watching his face crumple as she mentioned Eleanor. She's dying, Sarah said softly, and she's asking for you. Tom dropped the axe, his hands shaking. I thought she'd hate me, he whispered. I stole from her. Ran away. I didn't deserve her. Sarah saw the weight of his guilt, the decades of regret etched into his face. But then, a twist. A young woman stepped out of the cabin, her eyes curious. Dad, who's this? She asked. Sarah blinked. Dad. Tom had a daughter, maybe 30, with the same green eyes. This is Lily, Tom said, his voice breaking. My girl. I started over, but I never forgot Eleanor. Lily's presence changed everything. She was proof Tom had built a life, but also a reminder of the one he'd left behind. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy for Eleanor, who'd never known this part of his story. I'll come, Tom said finally, his voice resolute. I owe her that. Sarah nodded, her chest tight with emotion. She drove back to Willow Creek, Tom and Lily following in their truck. The reunion loomed, and Sarah wondered if it would heal Eleanor or break her heart all over again. The hospital parking lot was quiet as Sarah led Tom and Lily inside, the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. Tom's face was a mask of fear and hope, his daughter's hand resting on his arm as if anchoring him. Sarah hadn't told Eleanor they were coming she wanted to, but the words had stuck, as if saying them might jinx the fragile possibility of reconciliation. Inside, the hospital was a maze of fluorescent lights and hushed voices. Sarah glanced at Tom, his steps hesitant, like a man walking toward a truth he wasn't sure he could face. Lily, sensing his unease, whispered, You can do this, Dad. Sarah marveled at her strength, a quiet force that seemed to hold her father together. They reached Eleanor's room, and Sarah paused at the door, her hand trembling. Wait here, she said softly. Let me prepare her. Eleanor was awake, the photo still in her hands, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as if searching for Tommy in the cracks. Eleanor, Sarah began, her voice gentle. I found him. Tommy's here. Eleanor's breath hitched, her frail body tensing. He's here, she whispered, her voice breaking. Sarah nodded, tears stinging her eyes. She stepped aside, and Tom walked in, Lily behind him. The room seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor's eyes locked on Tom, and for a moment, time collapsed. The boy in the photo and the man before her merged into one. Tommy, she sobbed, reaching out. Tom fell to his knees beside her bed, grasping her hand. I'm so sorry, he choked out. I never meant to hurt you. Eleanor shook her head, tears streaming. You're here now? That's enough. Lily stood back, her eyes glistening. Sarah watched, her heart swelling with the beauty of the moment, but also aching for the years lost. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Lily, confusion flickering. Who's this? She asked. Tom hesitated, then said, My daughter, Lily. Eleanor's face softened, a smile breaking through her tears. You have a daughter, she whispered, as if it were a gift. Lily stepped forward, taking Eleanor's other hand. He talked about you, Lily said. All my life, he told me about the woman who saved him. The reunion was raw, filled with apologies and forgiveness, each word a stitch in a wound decades old. But then, a shadow crept in. A doctor entered, his face grave, and Sarah's stomach dropped. Eleanor's condition is worsening, he said quietly. Her heart is failing faster than we thought. The room froze, the joy of the moment shattered. Eleanor waved off the doctor, her voice firm despite her frailty. I've got my boy. I'm ready now. Sarah's heart broke. She'd brought Tom back, but time was slipping away. Tom stayed by Eleanor's side, recounting memories summers by the creek, her teaching him to dance in the kitchen. Lily joined in, sharing how Tom had taught her those same steps, keeping Eleanor's spirit alive in his own way. Sarah listened, her role as messenger fading into that of a witness to a love that had survived 50 years of silence. Then, another twist, a knock at the door. It was Daniel, the antique shop owner, his face a storm of emotions. Sarah hadn't told him Tom was back. She hadn't known how. You found him, Daniel said, his voice tight, his eyes locked on Tom. The air thickened with tension. Tom stood, facing his chosen brother, guilt etched into every line of his face. Danny, he started, but Daniel cut him off. You left us. Both of us. Eleanor's voice, weak but firm, broke the silence. Daniel, let it go. He's here now. Daniel's jaw clenched, but his eyes softened as he looked at Eleanor. He stepped forward, and after a moment, he embraced Tom, a grudging forgiveness born of love for the woman who'd raised them both. Sarah watched, tears falling, as the fractured family began to mend, even as Eleanor's time dwindled. The night passed in stories and tears, Eleanor's strength fading, but her heart full. Sarah stayed, feeling like an outsider yet bound to this family by the journey she'd undertaken. As dawn broke, Eleanor's breathing grew shallower, her hands still clutching the photo. Tom and Lily held her, Daniel at her side. And Sarah knew this was the ending Eleanor had longed for, not a cure, but a homecoming. Dawn painted the hospital room in soft gold, but the light couldn't hide the truth. Eleanor was slipping away. Her breaths were faint, each one a quiet battle, yet her face held a peace Sarah hadn't seen before. Tom sat closest, his hand wrapped around hers, the faded photo now resting on the blanket between them. Sarah stood by the window, exhaustion settling into her bones. She'd spent days chasing Tommy, piecing together a past she hadn't lived, and now she watched the family she'd helped reunite. Lily sat beside her father, her quiet strength a mirror of Eleanor's in the stories Tom had shared. Daniel, still guarded, lingered near the door, his presence a fragile bridge between resentment and forgiveness. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, finding Tom. "You came back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I always knew you would." Tom's tears fell freely now, no longer held back by guilt. "I should have come sooner," he said. "I was a fool." Eleanor shook her head, her smile faint but radiant. "You're here. That's all I ever wanted." Lily leaned in, her voice soft. "Grandma Eleanor," she said, the title slipping out naturally. "Dad told me how you taught him to see the stars. I want to learn too." Eleanor's eyes sparkled, a flicker of her old fire. "Look up, child," she murmured. "They're always there, even when you can't see them." Sarah's throat tightened. She saw the love that had shaped Tom, now passing to Lily, a legacy of care that outlasted pain. But the moment was fleeting. Eleanor's breathing slowed, the machines beeping a warning. Sarah stepped forward, instinct urging her to act. But the doctor, who'd been checking in quietly, shook his head. "It's time," he said. Tom clutched Eleanor's hand tighter. Daniel moved closer, and Lily rested her head on her father's shoulder. Sarah felt like an intruder, yet she couldn't look away. This was why she'd fought to find Tom, not just for Eleanor, but for the truth of what family could mean. As Eleanor's eyes closed, a soft smile lingered. "My boy," she whispered, and then she was gone. The room was silent, save for the soft sobs of Tom and Lily. Daniel's shoulders shook, his walls crumbling. Sarah wiped her tears, her heart heavy but full. She'd done what Eleanor asked, but the cost was this moment of loss, raw and undeniable. The days that followed were a blur. Tom, Lily, and Daniel planned a small memorial, using Eleanor's savings to bury her under the oak tree where she'd once taught Tom to whistle. Sarah helped, though she felt her role was over. Yet Lily surprised her, appearing at the hospital one evening with a small box. "This was Eleanor's," she said, handing it to Sarah. Inside was a locket, engraved with a tiny star and a note. For Sarah, who brought him home. Sarah opened it, finding a smaller version of the photo she'd carried. She choked back a sob, realizing Eleanor had seen her not just as a nurse, but as part of this story. "She'd want you to keep looking up," Lily said, echoing Eleanor's words. Sarah nodded, the locket warm in her hand, a reminder of the woman whose love had changed them all. The memorial was simple, held at dusk under the oak. Tom spoke of Eleanor's kindness, Daniel of her strength, and Lily of the stories that had shaped her father. Sarah listened, the locket around her neck, feeling Eleanor's presence in the rustling leaves. As the stars appeared, Tom looked up, his face peaceful for the first time. "She's there," he said, and Sarah believed him. Sarah returned to her shifts, the hospital unchanged, but her heart different. She kept the locket, a talisman of the journey that had taught her about love's endurance. Tom and Lily stayed in Willow Creek, rebuilding ties with Daniel, their fractured family healing under the weight of Eleanor's legacy. Sarah knew she'd carry this story forever, a reminder that even in loss, there was beauty in bringing people home.